I am Sherry Wilson, 32 years old, and a senior account manager at Pinnacle Solutions in Boston. For 8 years, I poured my heart and soul into this tech consulting firm, building relationships with clients who trusted me with their business and their dreams. But over the past few months, my boss Richard had become increasingly hostile, cutting me out and undermining my work at every turn. When his email arrived with "all comms through, HR now" in bold capital letters, something inside me snapped. What Richard never understood was that sometimes following orders to the letter can be the perfect revenge. If you are watching this from your office cubicle, planning your escape from corporate drama, hit like and subscribe. Trust me, what happened in our emergency boardroom will make your workplace politics look like child's play. Pinnacle Solutions was not for the faint of heart. Our office occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown Boston high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing panoramic views of the harbor, but nobody had time to enjoy the view. We were all too busy trying to climb the corporate ladder, stepping on fingers if necessary. I started as an entry-level coordinator fresh out of college with my business degree. While other new hires complained about the 60-hour weeks and cutthroat atmosphere, I thrived on the challenge. Within 2 years, I had been promoted twice. By year 5, I was managing my own portfolio of clients. Now, as a senior account manager, I had earned the respect of both colleagues and clients through consistent results and innovative strategies. While most colleagues respected me, Richard Baker, my direct boss and VP of Client Services, was a different story. Richard was 48 with thinning brown hair he tried to disguise with expensive haircuts and a perpetual tan from his weekend sailing trips. He had been with Pinnacle for 15 years and viewed the Client Services department as his personal kingdom. For the first few years working under him, things were fine. He recognized my work ethic and gave me increasing responsibility. But something changed about 2 years ago when I landed the Horizon Technologies account, a client he had personally failed to secure 3 times before. "Just beginner's luck," he had said, with a tight smile at the celebration happy hour. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Sherry." The words seemed congratulatory, but his eyes were cold. After that, I began collecting struggling accounts nobody wanted, clients on the verge of walking away, businesses with complex problems and tight budgets. While other account managers fought over the easy, prestigious clients, I built relationships with the underdogs, and one by one, I turned them around. Amanda Jones, our HR director, once pulled me aside after I salvaged the Patterson Industries account. She was 36, always professionally dressed in blazers and pencil skirts, with a calm demeanor that helped her navigate the company's political minefields. "You know you are making waves, right?" she asked, keeping her voice low despite us being alone in the break room. That account was supposed to fail. Richard had already told Jeffrey it was a lost cause. Jeffrey Williams was our CEO 55, and usually hands-off when it came to day-to-day operations. He cared about numbers, results, and keeping our investors happy. Speaking of investors, the most important was Harold Thompson of Thompson Ventures, a 62-year-old venture capitalist who had saved the company during a financial crisis 3 years ago. That crisis was before my time in senior management, but everyone knew the story. Poor decisions and mismanagement had driven Pinnacle to the brink of bankruptcy. Harold stepped in with a significant investment, but insisted on unusual contract terms. At the time, I did not know the details of those terms. I would learn them later, much to Richard's dismay. I built my client portfolio carefully over the years, nurturing relationships and constantly innovating our service approach. While Richard was playing golf with executives and taking 2-hour lunches, I was in the trenches solving problems. By this year, I managed 31 accounts worth over $15 million annually to the company. My approach was not flashy, just effective. When Miller Biotech was struggling with implementation, I personally worked weekends to create a custom training program. When global shipping needed to cut costs, I analyzed their processes and found efficiencies nobody else had spotted. My clients knew they could call me anytime, and I would pick up. "You have a gift for this," Natalie Robinson told me once. Natalie was my closest ally at Pinnacle, a project manager who had started the same year I did. Clients actually like you. That is rare in this business. The early signs of Richard's jealousy were subtle. He would question my methods in team meetings, or suggest that my approach was unsustainable. He began asking for daily updates on my major accounts. When clients specifically requested to work with me, his congratulations seemed forced. Just make sure you are following company protocols, he would remind me, as if I were some rogue agent instead of one of his top performers. The company's recent financial struggles only made things worse. After a disappointing third-quarter pressure from investors increased, Harold Thompson was scheduled to review our performance, and everyone was on edge. In this atmosphere, I still hoped for a promotion to director level within a year. My results certainly justified it. Brian Cooper, a new hire who had been assigned to shadow me once, asked why I put up with Richard's obvious resentment. I believe good work speaks for itself, I told him. Eventually, cream rises to the top. I still believed that then. I was wrong, of course. In corporate America, good work without good politics is like having a sports car with no fuel. You look impressive sitting there, but you are not going anywhere. The first real betrayal came during the executive quarterly meeting. I had spent weeks developing an innovative marketing strategy for our financial sector clients, creating detailed presentations and forecasts showing how we could increase revenue by 20% within 6 months. Richard had barely glanced at my work when I submitted it for review. So, imagine my surprise when sitting in the back of the conference room, taking notes, I heard Richard presenting my exact strategy to the executive team and board members. He used my slides, my data, even some of my exact phrasing, but my name was nowhere to be mentioned. This approach represents the direction our department needs to move in, Richard said, confidently, clicking through the presentation I had created. I believe this will set us apart from competitors. Jeffrey nodded approvingly. Harold Thompson, calling in remotely on the large screen at the front of the room, actually smiled. I like the innovation here, Richard. This is exactly what I have been saying Pinnacle needs. After the meeting, I cornered Richard in his office. That was my strategy, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I spent weeks developing that approach. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, looking unconcerned. We are a team, Sherry. Everyone contributes, and as department head, I present our collective work. This is not about individual recognition. But you did not even acknowledge the team. You presented it as your own work. He sighed as if I were being tedious. This is why I worry about your executive readiness. A true team player understands that results matter, not credit. Perhaps you are not as ready for advancement as you think. I left his office feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. 2 days later, I received an email that I had been removed from the Innovation Committee, a group I had been part of for over a year. The situation worsened when Charles Dempsey, CEO of Summit Financial and one of my biggest clients, specifically praised my work during a meeting with Jeffrey. I had helped Summit navigate a complex system integration that saved them millions. Sherry is the reason we renewed our contract, Charles said. Her dedication is unmatched in this industry. I noticed Richard's jaw tightening, his fingers gripping his pen so hard I thought it might snap. After that meeting, the exclusion began in earnest. I would arrive at work to discover client strategy sessions had been held without me. Richard reassigned 2 of my biggest clients, Westfield Technologies and Aurora Systems, to Brian without explanation. It is about workload balance, Richard claimed when I questioned him. You are stretched too thin. But I knew my capacity and workload better than anyone, and these were accounts I had personally rescued from the brink of cancellation. The loss of these clients would affect my annual numbers, and consequently my bonus. Through office gossip and loyal colleagues, I learned that Richard had been speaking negatively about me to other executives, suggesting I was difficult to manage and not a collaborative team member. The irony was painful. My success had always come from collaboration and relationship building. I tried addressing the issue professionally, scheduling a meeting with Richard and documenting my concerns. His response was dismissive. I think you are being oversensitive, Sherry. Perhaps the pressure is getting to you. Would you like me to have HR arrange some stress management coaching? Frustrated, I took my concerns to Amanda in HR. "I see what is happening," she said sympathetically, closing her office door for privacy. "But without documented incidents of clear misconduct, my hands are tied. Richard is a VP. He has been here a long time and has strong relationships with the executive team. So I just have to take it," I asked. Amanda sighed. "Document everything. Times, dates, witnesses. If there is a pattern of discriminatory behavior, we can address it. But general unfairness." She shrugged. "Unfortunately, that is not against company policy." The final blow of this initial phase came during my annual review. Despite exceeding all my targets, bringing in 3 new major clients, and receiving outstanding client satisfaction scores, Richard rated my performance as meets expectations rather than exceeds expectations. This rating directly impacted my bonus structure and future promotion prospects. When I questioned the rating, Richard cited teamwork concerns and communication issues, but provided no specific examples. I left the review meeting in a daze of confusion and disappointment. The career momentum I had worked so hard to build was stalling, and I could not understand why my results were not speaking for themselves. That evening, Natalie and I met for drinks at a bar far enough from the office to avoid running into colleagues. "He feels threatened by you," Natalie said bluntly after I explained what had happened. "You are outperforming him, and clients love you. In his mind, that makes you dangerous." But I have always been loyal to the department and the company I protested. Loyalty does not matter. This is about his insecurity. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Start documenting everything, Sherry. Every email, every meeting, every client interaction. I think Richard is building a case against you. You need to protect yourself." As I drove home that night, the disappointment gave way to something else: determination. If this was how the game was played, I would learn the rules. What I did not realize was that the situation would get much worse before it got better. Over the next few months, Richard's campaign against me intensified. He implemented a new oversight protocol that required his approval for any client deliverable or proposal I created. Mysteriously, this protocol only applied to my accounts. This additional layer of review will ensure quality consistency, the email announcement read. What it actually ensured was that everything I sent to clients was delayed by days, or sometimes weeks. When Lincoln Medical, a healthcare client I had worked with for 3 years, expressed frustration about delays, Richard suggested they might be better served by a different account manager. "I do not understand what is happening," said Deborah Lewis, their procurement director, when she called me directly. "We have always had such a smooth working relationship, and now everything takes 3 times as long." "New company protocols," I explained weakly, unwilling to throw my boss under the bus despite his behavior. In team meetings, Richard began openly criticizing my approaches. "Sherry's strategy for the Artemis project lacks forward thinking," he would say, despite having approved that very strategy 2 weeks earlier. Or, "The numbers Sherry presented need verification," implying my data could not be trusted. The passive-aggressive emails multiplied. "Just following up on our conversation about client expectations. I am not sure you fully grasp the importance of our approach." Or, "Reminder that all client meetings should include a senior team member, as your judgment in the Westlake situation raised concerns." The Westlake situation he referred to was actually a success story where I had salvaged a failing project, but Richard had reframed it as a crisis I had barely managed to contain. My breaking point came when I discovered Richard had been meeting privately with my clients. Patricia Morgan, my contact at North Star Industries, mentioned it casually during our weekly call. "Richard explained the new pricing structure to us last week," she said. My heart skipped. "Richard met with you. I was not aware of this meeting." There was an awkward pause. "Yes," he said, "it was standard procedure for VPs to check in with major accounts. I assumed you knew." I had not known, and it was definitely not standard procedure. After hanging up, I learned Richard had met with at least 7 of my other clients without informing me. He was systematically inserting himself between me and the relationships I had carefully built. The situation came to a head when Global Tech, one of my largest accounts worth over $2 million annually, was approaching contract renewal. Richard suddenly insisted on personally reviewing the renewal terms. "I think we need to increase their rates by 15%, he declared, though we had previously agreed on a more modest 5% increase based on my knowledge of their budget constraints. "They will walk away at 15%, I argued. "They have been very clear about their budget limitations this year." Richard dismissed my concerns. "If they value our services, they will pay market rates." When the Global Tech representatives predictably balked at the increased pricing, Richard blamed my poor communication of our value proposition. I spent the next 2 weeks working late every night, creating custom analyses and identifying additional service efficiencies to save the account. Against all odds, I managed to secure a renewed contract with a 7% increase, a win, given the circumstances. Rather than recognition for saving a $2 million account, I received an email from Richard questioning why I had gone around established channels to offer unauthorized concessions. That night I stayed late at the office, my desk lamp, the only light on the entire floor. I created a spreadsheet documenting every incident with Richard over the past year, dates, descriptions, witnesses, and impact on clients or company. The pattern was undeniable when laid out chronologically. I also began forwarding important emails to my personal account, saving meeting recordings, and keeping detailed notes of all client interactions. Natalie had been right. I needed protection. The stress began affecting my health. I developed insomnia, often lying awake, replaying confrontations with Richard, or imagining worst-case scenarios. I started getting tension headaches and found myself withdrawing from friends and family, too exhausted to maintain my personal relationships. "You need to consider looking for another job," my sister suggested during one of our rare phone calls. "No position is worth this level of stress." She was right, but I felt trapped. I had invested 8 years in building my client portfolio. The thought of abandoning my clients to Richard's mismanagement felt like a betrayal. And in truth, part of me was not ready to give him the satisfaction of driving me out. "Just a bit longer," I told myself. "Things will either improve or I will find an exit strategy that does not burn bridges." Little did I know that the match to light those bridges was already in Richard's hand. The situation was about to explode in a way none of us could have anticipated. The pivotal moment came during a presentation to Quantum Dynamics, a potential client worth potentially $5 million annually. I had spent weeks preparing a comprehensive proposal tailored to their specific needs, collaborating with our technical team to ensure we could deliver on every promise. The night before the presentation, I had finalized my slides and saved them to the shared drive, as required by company protocol. I arrived at the meeting room early to set up, quickly reviewing my presentation before the clients arrived. My stomach dropped as I clicked through the slides. Key sections had been altered. My carefully calculated ROI projections had been inflated by nearly 30%. Service deliverables I knew our team could not realistically provide had been added. The customized implementation timeline had been shortened by 2 months, making it practically impossible. Before I could make any changes, the Quantum team arrived along with Richard and Jeffrey. With no option but to proceed, I gave the presentation internally, cringing at the misleading information. During the Q&A session, Lawrence Bennett, Quantum's CTO, raised concerns about the timeline. "These implementation milestones seem very aggressive based on our infrastructure," he noted, frowning at the slide. "Your initial assessment suggested a much longer integration period." I felt sweat forming on my forehead. "You are absolutely right, Lawrence. The original timeline was—" "What Sherry means," Richard interrupted smoothly, "is that we have recently enhanced our implementation capabilities. The timeline is ambitious but achievable." Lawrence did not look convinced, and several other Quantum executives exchanged glances. After the meeting, I confronted Richard in the hallway. "You changed my presentation without telling me. You set me up to fail in there." His expression was cold. "I improved your presentation. Your numbers were too conservative. Your timeline too cautious. We need to show confidence to win accounts of this caliber. But we cannot deliver what you promised. when they discover that it damages not just this account, but my credibility with all my clients. Perhaps if you are not comfortable with ambitious targets, you should reconsider whether enterprise accounts are appropriate for your management style, he replied dismissively. I was still seething when I returned to my office and found an email from Richard sent to me and copied to the entire client services team. All communications with clients must now go through HR for review before sending. No exceptions. This policy is effective immediately. The capitalized message was followed by a paragraph about ensuring consistent communication standards and maintaining professional client relationships. It was clearly targeted at me, though sent to the entire team to maintain the appearance of a general policy change. I sat at my desk staring at the email, feeling a mix of shock, anger, and strangely a growing sense of calm. This was no longer subtle undermining. This was a direct attempt to prevent me from doing my job effectively. I forwarded the email to Natalie with a single question mark. Her response came within minutes. This is insane. He cannot possibly expect this to work. HR does not have the bandwidth or expertise to review all client communications. She was right, of course. Amanda and her small HR team could not possibly review every email proposal and update that our department of 20 account managers sent to hundreds of clients daily. The policy was unworkable, designed to fail. As I contemplated my options, a memory surfaced from a company meeting 3 years ago, shortly after Harold Thompson's investment saved the company. Harold had insisted on a special all-hands meeting to discuss new policies. Transparency with clients is non-negotiable, Harold had emphasized. The previous management team's greatest failure was hiding problems until they became catastrophes. That will never happen again under my watch. At the time, I had not paid much attention to the specifics focused on my own projects and clients. But now I wondered what mechanisms Harold had put in place to ensure that transparency. I called Natalie again. Do you remember anything about special contract terms when Thompson invested? Something about client transparency? Vaguely, she replied. I think there was something in the investor agreement. Angela in legal would know. Angela Fisher was a paralegal I had helped when she first joined the company. I found her in the legal department surrounded by stacks of contract binders. The Thompson investment terms, she repeated when I asked. Yes, there was an unusual clause. Harold called it the investor satisfaction clause. It required full transparency with both clients and investors about any service issues or client dissatisfaction. Can you show me the exact wording? I asked. Angela hesitated. These documents are confidential, Sherry. I understand, but this is important. I would not ask if it were not. Perhaps she saw the desperation in my eyes, or perhaps she had heard rumors about how Richard was treating me. Whatever the reason, she pulled a thick binder from her shelf and flipped to a tabbed section. Section 17.3, she said, pointing to a paragraph. It stipulates that any client complaints, service issues, or terminations must be reported to the lead investor within 24 hours. Failure to disclose such information constitutes a material breach of the investment agreement. And what happens in case of a breach? I asked. The investor can pull their funding with no penalties and retain first position lien on all company assets. She looked up at me. It would effectively end the company. I thanked Angela and returned to my office, a plan forming in my mind. Richard wanted all client communications to go through HR fine. I would comply with his directive to the letter. That night, I discovered something else. Richard had been hiding client complaints from the executive team. I found this out accidentally while searching for a previous proposal in the shared drive. There was a folder labeled Client Issues, Internal Only, that contained dozens of emails and reports documenting client dissatisfaction, service failures, and threats to terminate contracts. None of these had been reported up the chain or to investors as required. I stayed late reviewing all 31 of my client accounts carefully. At least 15 had expressed some form of dissatisfaction in recent months, largely due to the new bureaucratic processes Richard had implemented. 5 had specifically mentioned considering other vendors if issues were not resolved. The next morning, I arrived at work early, dressed in my most professional outfit, a charcoal gray suit, crisp white blouse, and the pearl necklace my grandmother had given me for graduation. I felt strangely calm as I prepared to follow Richard's instructions exactly as given. At 8:30 sharp, I began drafting client termination notices for all 31 of my accounts. The first termination notice went to Albany Systems, a loyal client for over 4 years. Dear Thomas, I wrote to their CIO. Due to changes in Pinnacle's management protocols, I regret to inform you that we will be terminating our service agreement effective 30 days from this notice. As per your contract section 12.1, this communication serves as official notification. All further communications regarding this matter must be directed to our Human Resources Department at hr@pinnaclesolutions.com. I copied Amanda from HR as Richard had instructed and pressed send. One by one, I repeated this process for each of my 31 clients, adjusting the notice period according to their specific contract terms. For some, it was 30 days, for others, 60 or 90. For each notice, I used formal professional language, cited the relevant contract clauses, and directed all questions to HR. And each one was copied to Amanda Jones, exactly as Richard had mandated. By 9:15, I had sent all 31 termination notices. I sat back in my chair, took a deep breath, and waited. The first response came at 9:22. Amanda burst into my office, her face pale. Sherry, what are you doing? I have already received 12 emails from clients, asking why their contracts are being terminated. I maintained a calm expression. I am following the new protocol Richard implemented yesterday. All client communications must go through HR for review. But these are termination notices. You cannot just terminate 31 client relationships without authorization. I pulled up Richard's email on my screen and turned the monitor toward her. The directive does not specify which communications require review. It says all communications in capital letters with no exceptions. I am simply following instructions. Amanda's eyes widened as she read the email again. This is clearly not what he intended. Perhaps not, I agreed. But it is what he wrote. And as he frequently reminds me, we must follow proper protocols. My phone began ringing. The caller ID showed Thomas from Albany Systems. I gestured to my computer. According to protocol, I cannot speak to clients directly. All communications must go through HR. Amanda's phone rang next then. Her email notification chimed repeatedly. She looked at me in disbelief. This is going to cause chaos. I am just following orders, I said simply. By 10 o'clock, the office was in full crisis mode. Clients were calling in panic, all being directed to HR as instructed. Amanda had called in her entire team to help manage the flood of calls and emails. The customer service department was fielding overflow calls, equally confused about what was happening. At 10:15, Jeffrey's assistant rushed to my office. The CEO wants to see you immediately. Emergency meeting in the main conference room. When I arrived, the room was already filling with anxious executives. Richard was there, his face flushed with anger. Amanda sat with her laptop open, looking overwhelmed. Daniel Clark, our company lawyer, was reviewing documents with a deep frown. Jeffrey paced at the head of the table. What the hell is going on? Jeffrey demanded as I entered. Why are we terminating all of our major accounts without discussion? Before I could answer, Richard jumped in. Sherry has clearly lost her mind. This is an act of sabotage against the company. I remained calm as I took a seat. I was following the new communication protocol that Richard implemented yesterday. I pulled out a printed copy of his email and slid it across the table to Jeffrey. All client communications must go through HR. No exceptions. Jeffrey read the email, his brow furrowing. And you interpreted this to mean you should terminate all your client accounts. The directive did not specify which communications were covered, only that all communications required HR review. I complied with that directive. Richard's face reddened further. This is a deliberate misinterpretation. Obviously, the policy was not intended for you to terminate our client relationships. Then perhaps the policy should have been more clearly written, I replied evenly. Amanda spoke up. For what it is worth, I have reviewed the termination notices. They are all properly formatted, cite the correct contract clauses, and follow our standard template. Sherry has technically followed all proper procedures. This is ridiculous. Richard slammed his hand on the table. She is trying to sabotage the company because of personal grievances. I maintained my composure. I have documented every incident of undermining credit stealing and client interference over the past year. I placed a folder on the table. I have also discovered that client complaints and service issues have been hidden from the executive team in direct violation of company policy and investor agreements. The room fell silent at this last statement. Jeffrey and Daniel exchanged concerned glances. What investor agreements? Jeffrey asked cautiously. Before I could elaborate, the conference room door opened. Harold Thompson walked in, his expression grim. Would someone like to explain why I have received calls from 14 different clients, asking why Pinnacle is terminating their contracts without explanation? He asked, his voice dangerously calm. Richard immediately shifted to damage control mode. Harold, this is an unfortunate misunderstanding. A disgruntled employee has taken an internal communication policy and deliberately misinterpreted it to cause harm. Harold turned to me. You are Sherry Wilson, correct? Several clients mentioned you specifically. I nodded. Yes, sir. And you sent these termination notices? I did, I confirmed, following a direct order that all client communications must go through HR review. Harold's eyes narrowed. Show me this order. Jeffrey handed him Richard's email. Harold read it slowly, then looked at Richard with clear disapproval. So you implemented an unworkable policy without consulting the executive team, and now you are blaming an employee for following your instructions to the letter. Richard stammered. The intent was clearly not for her to terminate client relationships. Harold turned back to me. These clients all speak very highly of you, Miss Wilson. They are confused and concerned. Several mentioned, this is part of a pattern of recent service issues they have experienced. Yes, I said. There have been numerous problems caused by new approval processes and interference with established client relationships. I have documented these issues in detail. Harold gestured to the folder on the table. Is that your documentation? I nodded and he picked it up, flipping through the pages with increasing concern. These client complaints were never reported to the investor board. Richard interrupted. Many of these are minor issues that did not warrant escalation. That is not your determination to make, Harold said sharply. The investor agreement is very clear about transparent reporting of all client satisfaction issues. The tension in the room was palpable as Harold continued reviewing my documentation. Finally, he looked up at the lawyer. Daniel, I think we need to review the investor satisfaction clause in light of this situation. The emergency meeting reconvened after lunch now with the full executive team present. The boardroom felt charged with tension as Harold Thompson sat at one end of the long mahogany table opposite Jeffrey. Richard sat rigidly in his chair, occasionally shooting venomous glances my way. Let me make sure I understand what has happened. Harold began, his voice controlled but clearly angry. Sherry Wilson, who manages 31 client accounts worth over $15 million annually, was instructed to route all client communications through HR. She followed this instruction, precisely sending termination notices to all her clients with HR copied. Is that correct? Technically correct, Richard interjected, but clearly a malicious interpretation of a standard protocol update. Harold ignored him, continuing. And these clients, upon receiving termination notices, contacted me directly because they were confused and upset. Several mentioned ongoing service issues that have apparently been increasing over recent months. Minor growing pains, Richard insisted. Nothing that warranted investor notification. Harold's expression hardened. Miss Wilson has provided extensive documentation suggesting otherwise. He gestured to my folder, which now sat open in front of him. I see emails from at least 11 clients threatening to reduce services or terminate contracts entirely. None of these were reported to the investor board. With all due respect, Harold, Richard said, trying to sound reasonable, every service business deals with client complaints. We handle these at the department level unless they represent material risks to the business. Harold leaned forward. And who determines what constitutes a material risk? As VP of Client Services, that would fall under my judgment, Richard replied. Actually, Harold countered, the investor agreement specifically defines material client dissatisfaction and requires reporting of all such instances within 24 hours. He turned to Daniel, our company lawyer. Would you please read Section 17.3 of our investment agreement? Daniel cleared his throat nervously, pulling up the document on his laptop. Section 17.3 states, company shall notify lead investor within 24 hours of any client communication indicating dissatisfaction with services, potential reduction of services or potential contract termination. Such notifications shall include the full client communication and management's response plan. Failure to provide such notification shall constitute a material breach of this agreement. Harold nodded. And what constitutes a material breach, Daniel? Daniel swallowed visibly. A material breach grants the lead investor the right to withdraw all funding with no penalties and maintain first position lien on all company assets. The room went completely silent. Harold slowly slid the investor agreement across the table to Daniel. The lawyer's eyes went wide as he reviewed the document more carefully. Oh no, he whispered. Harold continued. This clause was added specifically because the previous management team concealed client dissatisfaction until it was too late. When I invested 3 years ago, the company had lost 40% of its client base due to service issues that the board was never informed about. He turned to Jeffrey. I made it abundantly clear that transparent communication about client relationships was non-negotiable. Jeffrey looked ashen. I was aware of the clause, but I was under the impression all significant client issues were being reported appropriately. Clearly they were not, Harold replied. Richard tried again to redirect blame. Sherry has been difficult to manage for months. She resists direction and overreacts to constructive feedback. This stunt, with the termination notices, demonstrates her instability. I finally spoke up. I have emails showing Richard taking credit for my work, excluding me from client meetings, and implementing unnecessary approval processes that damaged client relationships. I also have client testimonials praising my service and expressing confusion about the recent changes. It is true, Amanda from HR confirmed reluctantly. Several clients have specifically mentioned Sherry as the reason they remain with Pinnacle despite recent service issues. Harold nodded thoughtfully. I remember when we lost the Westfield account 2 years ago. The official explanation was budget constraints on their end, but I always suspected there was more to that story. There was, I said quietly. Richard reassigned the account to a junior manager despite Westfield's request to continue working with me. They left 30 days later. That is absurd, Richard protested. Westfield made internal changes that made our services redundant. The confrontation was interrupted by a phone call. Harold's mobile rang, and he checked the screen. It is Elizabeth Carter from Meridian Technologies, one of our top 5 accounts. I am going to take this on speaker if nobody objects. Before anyone could respond, he answered and put the phone on the table. Elizabeth, this is Harold Thompson. I have you on speaker with the executive team at Pinnacle. Harold, I am glad I reached you. Elizabeth's voice came through clearly. I am trying to understand what is happening at Pinnacle. We received a termination notice from Sherry this morning, but that cannot be right. We just renewed our contract last month. There has been a miscommunication, Harold explained smoothly. The termination notice was sent in error. That is a relief, Elizabeth replied. Honestly, if Sherry were leaving, we would likely need to reevaluate our relationship with Pinnacle. She has been incredible at managing our account, especially these past few months, when things seem to get more bureaucratic on your end. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Can you elaborate on those bureaucratic changes? Harold asked. Just more layers of approval, longer response times. Sherry was always responsive, but she mentioned that new protocols required senior management review for decisions she used to make independently. It slowed everything down. Frankly, if not for her extraordinary efforts to work around these obstacles, we might have started looking at other vendors. Harold thanked Elizabeth, promised to have Sherry call her directly to clarify the situation, and ended the call. The room remained silent for several moments afterward. Finally, Harold turned to Jeffrey. This is exactly the kind of situation the transparency clause was designed to prevent. Clients were clearly expressing dissatisfaction, yet none of this was reported to investors. Richard tried one last desperate tactic. Sherry has been selectively presenting information to make me look bad. This is a calculated attempt to undermine my authority after I gave her a mediocre performance review. A mediocre review? Harold raised an eyebrow. For an employee managing $15 million, in accounts with glowing client testimonials. There were other factors, Richard insisted. Teamwork concerns, communication issues. Let me be clear, Harold said, his voice now steely. Based on what I have seen today, Pinnacle is technically in breach of our investment agreement. I could pull my funding immediately. Jeffrey paled. Harold, please. This is clearly a misunderstanding and breakdown in communication protocols. We can fix this. Harold nodded slowly. Yes, we can. But it will require significant changes. He looked directly at Richard, starting with client services leadership. The implication was unmistakable. Richard's face flushed deep red. You cannot be serious. I have been with this company for 15 years. You are taking the word of a manipulative employee over a proven executive. I am taking the word of 14 clients who called me personally today, along with well-documented evidence of systematic issues, Harold replied calmly. The investor satisfaction clause exists precisely to prevent this type of situation. Client relationships are Pinnacle's most valuable asset, and they have been mismanaged under your leadership. Jeffrey finally took control of the meeting. Richard, I think we need to continue this discussion privately. Can you step outside with me for a moment? As they left, the remaining executives sat in uncomfortable silence. Amanda gave me a small, sympathetic smile. Daniel continued reviewing the investor agreement with a worried expression. Harold moved to sit beside me. Your clients think very highly of you, Miss Wilson. That means something to me as an investor. Thank you, I replied simply. 15 minutes later, Jeffrey returned alone. His expression was grim, but resolved. Richard will be transitioning out of the company effective immediately, he announced. Sherry, I would like you to step in as interim director of client services while we assess the department's needs. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. I had not wanted Richard's career to end only for the undermining to stop, but his actions had brought these consequences upon himself. We have significant damage control to do with clients, Jeffrey continued. Sherry, please work with Amanda to create a communication plan explaining the situation. I want personal calls to all affected clients by end of day. As the meeting adjourned, Harold stopped me at the door. You showed remarkable composure through this situation. Not many people would have maintained their professionalism while being undermined. I just followed the protocols exactly as written, I replied. A small smile touched his lips. Sometimes the best way to expose a bad system is to follow it perfectly. Remember that as you rebuild this department. The days following Richard's departure were intense but productive. I worked closely with Amanda to craft transparent communications for all clients, explaining that there had been an internal miscommunication and that their contracts remained in good standing. We decided against mentioning Richard, specifically focusing instead on our commitment to improved service moving forward. We value your business and apologize for any confusion, I told Thomas from Albany Systems during our first reconciliation call. I will be serving as your direct contact going forward, with no additional approval layers. That is a relief, Thomas replied. Those termination notices gave us quite a scare, but honestly, if it means we get back to the responsive service we had originally, I am all for the change. Similar conversations followed with each client. While a few expressed lingering concerns, all 31 ultimately agreed to continue their relationships with Pinnacle. Some even expanded their contracts once I was able to implement more efficient service processes. 2 weeks after the boardroom confrontation, Jeffrey made my promotion official. I was now Director of Client Services, with a substantial salary increase and a seat at the executive table. My first official act was to reorganize the department, eliminating unnecessary approval layers and empowering account managers to make decisions within their areas of expertise. I also worked with Amanda to create a transparent client communication system with all feedback, whether positive or negative, shared openly with the executive team and investor board. Harold was particularly supportive of this initiative. This is exactly what I envisioned when I added that clause to the investment agreement he told me during one of our weekly update calls. Transparent communication allows us to address issues before they become crises. With Harold's continued support and investment, Pinnacle's financial situation stabilized. My promotion speech to the client services team emphasized our new approach. Our success depends entirely on our clients' success, I told the assembled account managers. No political games, no hiding problems, no bureaucratic obstacles to good service. We succeed together, or not at all. The team responded enthusiastically, especially those who had also struggled under Richard's leadership. Natalie gave me a knowing smile from the back of the room. She had recently accepted a promotion to lead our project management office, a well-deserved advancement. Brian, the junior account manager, who had once asked why I tolerated Richard's behavior, approached me after the meeting. "I learned a valuable lesson from watching you," he said. "Document everything, follow the rules exactly, and let the results speak for themselves." I smiled. Just remember that leadership is about lifting others up, not tearing them down. Richard's biggest mistake was seeing talented team members as threats instead of assets. Rebuilding trust within the team took time. Some had been loyal to Richard and viewed his departure with suspicion. Others had witnessed his undermining tactics and feared similar treatment from new leadership. I made a point of recognizing team members' contributions, publicly sharing credit generously, and creating opportunities for advancement based on clear objective criteria. Despite the professional victory, I struggled with conflicting emotions. There was satisfaction in being vindicated, but also guilt about Richard's fate. According to industry gossip, he was having difficulty finding equivalent work, his reputation tarnished by his abrupt departure from Pinnacle. "You should not feel responsible," Natalie insisted during one of our lunch discussions. "He made his choices. You just exposed them." I know I agreed, but I never wanted his career destroyed. I just wanted fair treatment. "That is what makes you different from him," she pointed out. "He would have celebrated your downfall. You feel compassion for his." 6 months after my promotion, our quarterly metrics showed dramatic improvements. Client satisfaction scores increased by 27%. Retention reached 98%, the highest in company history. We had added 12 new accounts, and existing clients had expanded services by an average of 15%. During a technology conference in Chicago, I unexpectedly encountered Richard in the exhibition hall. He looked older, his confident demeanor replaced by a wary fatigue. He was representing a much smaller consulting firm, his position several levels below his previous role at Pinnacle. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded space. I nodded politely, and after a moment's hesitation, he returned the gesture before turning away. That small interaction gave me unexpected closure. We had both moved on, albeit in different directions. Back at Pinnacle, I initiated a mentoring program, specifically designed to help women navigate corporate politics. The program paired junior team members with senior leaders across departments, creating networks of support and guidance. Corporate America can be especially challenging for women, I explained during the program launch. Having allies and mentors who understand these dynamics is invaluable. The program quickly became one of our most popular initiatives, with participants reporting greater job satisfaction and clearer career advancement paths. During our annual review with Harold and the investor board, I presented our department's impressive results. Harold nodded approvingly as I concluded my presentation. The transformation in client services has exceeded our expectations, he said. Your leadership has proven that transparency and empowerment create better results than fear and control. As I returned to my office that evening, I reflected on everything that had happened. Richard's attempt to restrict my communication had backfired spectacularly, ultimately giving me a platform to implement positive change throughout the organization. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about corporate politics, documentation, and the power of following rules to the letter when those rules are fundamentally flawed. But more importantly, it had shaped my leadership philosophy. Success is not a zero-sum game, and lifting others up creates more opportunities for everyone. I now have a framed quote on my office wall. Success is not just about climbing the ladder, it is about building a ladder that others can climb with you. That philosophy has served me well as director and will continue to guide me as I navigate future challenges. Sometimes the perfect revenge is not getting even, but getting better. And sometimes malicious compliance is the most effective way to expose a broken system. What is your experience with difficult bosses? Have you ever been in a situation where following the rules exactly exposed problems in the system? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of corporate intrigue taught you something valuable, please like, subscribe, and share with anyone navigating workplace politics. Remember, documentation is your best friend in any professional environment.